My dad used to take me and my brother camping when we were kids. He always told us it was character building and we would learn a lot about ourselves out there. We never used to go to any official campsites or anything like that. He would always take us deep into the wilderness where there was no cell reception and miles away from anywhere. My dad was quite the survivalist. You could airdrop him from a plane in an unknown territory and he could find his way home. We always set off early in the morning so we would have time to get to the destination and pitch our tents and build a fire. The last time we camped, my dad parked the car down some dirt road and we set off walking into the forest. About 30 minutes into our journey, we saw what I can only describe as a small shed. It looked derelict and no one had entered it for years. Far too small to be a home for anyone, and it didn't make any sense for it to be all the way out here. As we walked past, I tried to look through the window, but it was too dirty to see anything inside. I could see it was locked from the outside by a padlock, which looked a whole lot newer than the shed. We continued to walk for another 20 minutes and finally set up camp. We built a fire and got everything set up for the next day so we could set off early in the morning. Dad said he had something special for us, but wouldn't tell me or my brother what it was. Later into the evening, as the night started to settle in, it started to rain, and I don't mean drizzle. I mean it started to pour down torrential rain. We all went into our tents to stay dry and would talk on the walkie-talkies. About an hour later, we heard 2 gunshots that didn't sound that far away. My dad told me and my brother to stay put, and he would go and check what it was. My brother and I waited for my dad to return, but after about 45 minutes, we were starting to worry. We tried to call him on the walkie-talkie, but there was no answer. After another 30 minutes, me and my brother decided we were going to look for our dad when we heard someone trudging through the mud outside our tent. We then heard 2 more gunshots in the distance, and whoever was outside our tent ran off into the distance. We gathered anything we might need, like hunting knives and a flare gun that we had for emergencies. Dad told us if anything were to ever happen, to always make sure we took the flare gun. The rain continued to pour, and we set off walking to find our dad. My dad had taught us some tricks about tracking, which we tried to use, but after about 2 hours, it felt like we were just walking around in circles. It didn't help that the rain was turning everything into a boggy swamp. That's when I saw a small light coming from the distance. As we got closer, we realized it was the shed we had seen earlier that day. There seemed to be some small lantern or candle shining through the dirt in the window. We tried to call my dad on the walkie-talkie and heard the static sound coming from the shed. The downpour of the rain drowned out the sound of us trying to creep through the bushes and towards the shed. As I was the oldest of me and my brother, I said I would go and check for any signs of our dad. As I got closer, I saw that the door, which was earlier padlocked, was now open. I found our dad tied up and laying on the floor unconscious. He had a small laceration to his head that was bleeding quite profusely. I called my brother, and he helped me to wake him and get him to his feet. We left everything at the camp and made our way back to the car. Thankfully, although my dad was concussed, he was able to lead us back the way we came. He later told us that he found a man sitting on some rocks holding a gun, and he called over to him to make himself known. The man started laughing, and next thing he knew, he woke up on the floor in the shed. He said someone must have hit him from behind, and it knocked him out cold. We drove home that night, and my dad came back a few days later with a few of his hunting buddies, but they were unable to find anything. All our tents and things we left behind had been packed up and taken. Every now and again, my dad goes out on a drive for a couple of days with his buddies. I'm certain they go back, looking for whoever knocked him out and tied him up. My dad's just too proud to let it go. A few of my friends and I decided to go camping while we were home from college for the summer. I had never been camping before and just took the bare essentials: food, sleeping bag, and a tent I had borrowed from my uncle. We drove to a local lake in Arizona and camped just off the water's edge. The night went as expected, and we eventually got into bed to go to sleep around 1 a.m. I was in a tent on my own and couldn't really sleep, so I was just playing games on my DS. After being in bed for about an hour or so, I heard a screaming sound coming from across the lake. It didn't sound like a person screaming, but I still to this day have no idea what animal it could have been. I turned down the volume on my DS to listen more intently. As I did, I could hear something splashing in the lake. I looked outside of my tent but couldn't really see anything, but could definitely hear something splashing in the water. This wasn't like a bird or a fish splashing. This seemed much larger. If we were by the ocean, I might have thought it was a shark attacking and eating a seal or something, but not here at the lake. I called my friends who were still asleep, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My friends heard the screaming and splashing too, and said maybe it was an alligator or something. Alligators aren't really popular here, but I suppose it wasn't impossible. But the screaming was like nothing I'd ever heard before or since. We were too far from anywhere to do anything about it, and my cell had no service. It wasn't a popular place to go camping, so it's likely that it wasn't another party of campers, and we'd not seen or heard anyone else. I tried to capture the splashing and sounds on my phone, but you couldn't really make it out. After a few minutes, the splashing and screaming stopped, but we were too freaked out to go back to bed. We all stayed awake for the rest of the night, and as soon as it was light enough to see properly, we packed up and headed back home. We were due to stay another night, but none of us felt safe staying there, not knowing what the screaming and splashing was. We reported it the next day, but I don't think it was ever followed up, and we never found out what it could have been. I've been camping since, but I never went back to camp at the lake. Me and my two twin cousins, Lance and Larry, would often go camping out in the woods near our house. There was a spot we would camp every time, so our parents knew where we were. It was easily accessible through our garden, as it backed onto some woodland. My dad would come to check on us throughout the night to make sure we were safe and not doing anything that we shouldn't be. Sometimes we would hear my dad creeping in the bushes, trying to spy on us without interrupting our night. He most likely thought that if he made himself known, then as soon as we knew he was gone, we would misbehave. Most of the time, we would just be cooking hot dogs on a fire, or making s'mores and telling ghost stories. In our first year of high school, Lance and Larry both got girlfriends, and they told them about our camping trips, and they asked if they could join us one night. Our parents would never let us camp out with girls at that age unsupervised, so we all agreed to keep it a secret. Girls said they would tell their parents they were sleeping at each other's house and sneak over with sleeping bags. To plan that we would take 2 tents as normal, but the girls would have to wait and hide inside one of the tents until my dad had been and gone. Everything went according to plan. We set up the tents, the girls snuck over with their sleeping bags, and we lit a fire to keep us warm and sit around. As Lance was telling his favorite ghost story, we heard the cracking of twigs and crunching of leaves behind us. We could hear footsteps slowly approaching. "My dad's coming! Hide!" I yelled to my dad to let him know we were aware he was watching us, but there was no answer. I yelled again, but still, nothing. We continued doing what we were doing, and eventually we heard Dad's footsteps leaving. Dad was gone. We were now officially unsupervised. The girls came out of the tent and sat closer to the fire. We told more stories and roasted some more of the marshmallows we had. As we sat there talking, we heard a branch snap somewhere behind the tents. We shone our flashlight over in that direction, but we couldn't see anything. A few minutes later, we heard footsteps creeping round the other side of the trees. Someone was with us, watching us. I thought it might be my dad, but he never came after dark. "Hello? Is anybody there?" No one answered, and we just continued our night thinking it was an animal or something. Then we saw a flashlight coming towards us. This time it was my dad. He caught us sitting there with the girls. My dad told us that the police had visited our house as some peeping Tom was in the neighborhood. He came to get us and bring us home, knowing some weirdo was walking the streets. We got into trouble for having the girls there, and he rang their parents to come and collect them from the house. We left the tents there until morning, as it was too dark to pack everything up, but when we came back the next day, The tents had been trashed and torn to shreds. I don't think they ever caught the peeping Tom, and I have no idea if that was who trashed our tents. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.